Hold on to your hats. This is a little about me. It's everything that gentleman just said. Awesome. So who cares if I can hack your toaster? I mean, this is really the crux of the issue with this talk, and we've talked about this for a long time. Why it's always a toaster, I'll never truly know. I mean, I think of as a toaster as an Internet of Thing, like I'm usually standing near my toaster when it's making toast. I really don't need my smartphone to connect to the cloud to talk to my toaster, although I'd probably still buy one. But who cares, right? What's the risk to all of us? This is the typical Michael Santarcangelo question he asks on the show now. Who cares? Why do we care? This is like my stick figure diagram of the Internet of Things. I borrowed a little bit from the Veracode research that was released in the past couple of months that talks about the Internet of Things. And if you look at the architecture for the Internet of Things, we have that big box up there that's supposed to be a cloud, but really just came out to be a box. And we've got all kinds of applications inside of the cloud. And the device things are talking to one API, sometimes over wireless. There's your mobile phone thing, which is talking to a mobile API, which has an app that you're using on the phone. And then you have this browser thing that you can access the cloud as well. So we've got this merger of cloud, of Internet of Things, devices, wireless, mobile applications. So all of this technology coming together that makes up the Internet of Things. Now, everyone who's sitting in this room who does penetration testing, vulnerability assessments is like, wow, look at all the different attack points, right? There's wireless over here, there's APIs over here, there's mobile applications, tons and tons of attack points. This talk will focus on the device thing. I hate to kind of disappoint you, right? The Veracode research touches on that. But this will focus sheerly on the device thing. It's been my area of research. And we've got a new open source project, which I'll give you a sneak preview, which isn't quite published yet. Nick, raise your hand. Nick? Yeah, there's Nick. Nick was I'll talk about our roles in the project, which will come up towards the end. Okay. So since we're going to focus on the device thing, what is an embedded device? I've searched high and low for years and years to find the right definition for what is an embedded device. That is an embedded system that is a special purpose system which the computer is completely encapsulated by the device it controls. When you walk up to your washer and dryer, right, you're not breaking out your flip-up monitor, your mouse and keyboard and going on the command prompt. Well, I mean, some of us probably are. But typically, you want to wash your clothes. Okay, well, some of us maybe will wash our clothes. But that's the function of the device, is to wash clothes. It's asking you questions like, what do you want your water temperature to be? Do you want steam? Yeah, I got a washer and dryer with steam, and I had to do like the plumbing for it. So every time I use it, I'm like, yes, I want steam. It was a pain in the ass to set up. I want steam. That's the function of the device, not to be a computer, but to allow you to wash clothes. And therefore, that is the premise for this talk and the research that we've done. Okay, so does anyone know what the relationship is between all these devices? What do all of these devices have in common? Anyone? Shout it out. I can't hear you. They're all vulnerable. They're all wireless. Probably both true. Other than that. No, they're all in my house. So yeah, I've got a Nest, the Sonos, and my new thing. Does anyone know what SkyDrop is? Oh, so from my phone, you have to come see me later and I can show you my app for controlling my sprinkler system. Because everybody needs this, right? You need this. You need to know how much water is being per zone. You got to be able to control the water temperature and how much it sprays according to slope and connect to the internet. All right, never mind. I think it's cool, okay? But these are consumer embedded mobile cloud things. So there's a mobile application, there's a cloud application, and there's an embedded device. And slowly, these things are creeping into your homes. Now, my home, maybe more than some of you, maybe not. Maybe you've got more devices at home. But as things die, my sprinkler system head controller system died. I needed a new one. I replaced it with this consumer embedded mobile cloud thing that obviously could potentially have vulnerabilities when I look at it. So these devices will slowly creep into your home. Smart things, Nest, smoke detectors, Sonos, and these things link together so I can link my smart things to my Sonos so there can be audible alerts. In fact, I really want to tie it to like your sprinkler systems are running. Like that'd be awesome. It's so cool. Anyway, so these are consumer embedded things. So these don't have a mobile or cloud application component to them. These are just an embedded, typically Linux system that sits on your network in your home. And there's a difference, security-wise. We talk about cameras inside the house, and we'll talk about that. We're going to play a game. It's going to be a lot of fun. Does anyone watch CSI Cyber? Anyone want to admit to watching CSI Cyber? No? I'm the only one? Come on. All right, well, if you do and you just don't want to admit it, you'll have an advantage in the game. So these are consumer embedded things, right? They run Linux. This is the 2013 gift to my wife for Christmas. This is the 2014 gift to my wife for Christmas, which is a scale, because it goes with the she asked for it. I'm still happily married, but anyway. Now, what's interesting, the takeaway from this slide, you've got all these devices, right, potentially vulnerable, and in the middle, they all connect through your wireless router. And wireless routers are like the epitome of a vulnerable embedded system. And so I don't have a D-Link at my house, only for testing purposes, right? It doesn't run my house. But everything connects through it. And that's typically in your house your most vulnerable device of every single one of our homes. So I thought that was kind of scary. Okay, now consumer things I want. You need a mattress that lets you control temperature on his and her side of the bed and monitors your sleep habits, because you have to know if you're getting a restless night's sleep, and the alarm clock in it waits until you're at the optimum sleep pattern mode to wake you up, so you don't wake up groggy. I'm like, how do I live without one right now? I don't know how. You can pre-order them, which I'm totally going to do. Door locks, your crock pot, your toilet. I really want the Wi-Fi toilet so I can connect it to Twitter so that everyone knows what's happening in my life. It turns out those toilets are really expensive. Although they're air dryer, warm water, it's wonderful. I want one. Okay, so now I think this is really cool. This is a Nest thermostat that someone has ripped apart and attached all things to and hacked it. I don't want to take away from the person's research or this type of research. I think it's awesome. But if someone is going to break into your home, along the lines of how much do you care? If someone's going to break into your home and they're going to connect stuff to your thermostat to change the temperature and hack your thermostat, more than likely they're just going to snuff you out with your own pillow. So, on the scale of risk, like we heard from the previous talk, not a big deal to me. Okay, why should you then attack embedded systems? Why are these the targets of attackers? So when did people start caring about security? Anyone? All right, let me ask a question first. How many of you in this audience are tech support for your friends and family? Oh, I can see the cursing under your breath. I saw it on all of you. So when did they start calling you about security problems? What was the trigger? What happened?
They haven't yet.
They haven't yet. Wow, that's really, okay. So, your family's part of a big botnet. That's cool. What's that? Yeah, they got hacked, but what couldn't they do? What did it present? Yeah, I can't browse porn anymore. This is important. This is why the internet exists, and now I can't because I've got this virus and I need security, right? It was pop-ups that allowed you to... Oh, there was a transition on that slide. Did you see that? That was really cool. Look at that. So there was pop-ups, right? The whole screen was filled with pop-ups. I have to call my friend, the computer guy, my family member, the computer guy, to get rid of these. I care about security now because I can't use the device. It's impeding on my ability to use the device. And that's when I think people will start caring about security. The reason that no one cares about their wireless router, there's a lot of reasons, is you can't see it. There's no interface to it. There's no monitor, mouse, or keyboard on it. When ads, though, start coming up on your smart TV, does anyone know what movie that's from? I know it's hard to see. Idiocracy. Thank you. The last time I gave this presentation, no one had seen that movie. I was like, you gotta go see that movie. And the most popular show in the movie Idiocracy is, can you read it? Ow, my balls, right? And it has all the ads around it. If your TV looked like that, you would start to care about the security of your devices and go, well, when I buy that new Samsung TV, how do I keep the firmware up to date? Privacy. A lot of these devices, the one I like to use is the refrigerator, right? Has a camera on the inside so that when you're at the supermarket, you can go on your smartphone and see what's in your refrigerator so that you know what to buy. Again, how do we live without these devices? I don't know. Somehow we get through and make it through the day, but it has privacy concerns. When do you go to your refrigerator and open the door? What if someone hacks your refrigerator? Now they can see you in your underwear at 3 in the morning reaching for the ice cream. That's a privacy violation. But even more so, some have speculated that with these new smart refrigerators, some people can extrapolate the information based on what ingredients are in your refrigerator, health problems you may have, and it's a health privacy violation. So I think there are privacy concerns that people are going to have. Certainly the baby monitor scenario is a privacy concern as well. People hacking into, well, hacking, I think it's just a weak or default password on those routers or on those cameras, and we just call it hacking. Attackers care. They're building huge botnets based on embedded systems. This is happening more and more. I used to talk about this theoretically. This happens in practice. The Lizard Squad botnet took down Krebs on security. The Moonworm compromised hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Linksys routers, or some ridiculous number of Linksys routers. And while the press will say, well, they're using it to mine bitcoins, and how stupid is that? Again, go back to, there's no monitor, mouse, or keyboard on your embedded systems at home. So when I put malware on it, which, by the way, there is no antivirus software in these systems, and malware that's developed for MIPS isn't going to have a signature, so there's really no way to detect it. I think it's super smart to put a botnet on these systems because you can fly under the radar, and it lasts for a much longer period of time. That was the Lizard Squad botnet. Sorry, I'm going fast to get to the demo part. Industrial control systems also have these vulnerabilities. And what you're going to see as I go through some of these different categories, the vulnerabilities that exist on all of these systems persist throughout the different use cases, whether it's industrial control systems. And why do we care about SCADA? Well, someone could blow up a nuclear power station. Someone can take down the power. There are a lot of reasons why it's really bad. Okay, but the same systems that power the building entry, HVAC, lighting for your organizations have the same caliber of vulnerabilities: default passwords, weak passwords, buffer overflows, web application vulnerabilities. All of those systems have a similar set of vulnerabilities. Medical devices. My good friend Billy Rios gave a talk years ago and still talks about it this day, where he analyzed the security, and it says right in the article, hard-coded password vulnerabilities in medical devices. These are the same devices we've joked about on D-Link systems for years. Billy Rios gets sick last year, ends up in a hospital, looks up, he's connected to the same device he did the research on that had a hard-coded password vulnerability. The vendor still hasn't fixed the issue. What's Billy's choice? Disconnect and die, or stay plugged into the vulnerable system? How's that for a risk decision? Okay, so who wants to play? Really, no one wants to admit to watching CSI Cyber? I think that's hilarious. Come on, it's gotten better. No? All right, maybe not. Okay, but here's what we're going to play a game. I'm going to put up a scenario from the show that has to do with embedded device security. You're going to tell me if that's cyber or reality. Okay? Now, there's no prizes for the game. It's just a fun game. Well, never mind. There's no prizes. Okay? Now, I did caption some of these images. So now, some of you remember earlier on in the season, there was the roller coaster hack. Does anyone know what happened with the roller coaster hack? No one knows it. So someone broke into the control room, installed a custom SCADA device that they custom made with Bluetooth on it, so that they could disable all the safety mechanisms so that the roller coaster would crash. Now, does anyone think that is cyber or reality? Reality. Kind of split. Okay. So I'm saying cyber, because the attack is way easier than that. And this is my reasoning why, and since it's my presentation, I get to decide whether it's cyber or reality. And I'm saying it's cyber because you don't need to fabricate a board and put a Bluetooth chip on it. You just need to take a USB thumb drive and put malware on it. Okay, if you need connectivity, you're probably going to put a 3G or 4G modem on the system to do that. Way easier than going to someone, having them fabricate a board, which leaves evidence, which gets traced back, which makes for great television, but not reality. Okay, this is my favorite one. The printers were hacked and set fire to remotely because custom firmware was uploaded to the printer, which allowed the heating element to overheat and catch fire. Reality?
Cyber.
You're all wrong. That's cyber. Physical mechanisms exist inside a printer. See, now you're all, oh, I don't know what's inside cyber. Physical mechanisms exist inside the printer to prevent that from happening. I'm sure there are. You could find a model or two where that's possible. Certainly not on a widespread basis. Also, printer firmware is extraordinarily horrible. So horrible it's even difficult to modify and upload your own. It's absolutely atrocious to work with. Also, when they were on the show, the guy on the show that was in Dawson's Creek, I can't think of him other than the guy from Dawson's Creek, and he goes in, and he's an FBI agent now, and he goes in, and he opens up the melted printer, right, and he pulls out the board, and then he takes his tweezers, and he pulls the chip off, and then he's like, this is the firmware chip, because he just knew that because he was on Dawson's Creek, and then he puts it in his reader and sends the firmware off. Now, there's a lot of things wrong with that. One of the most glaring things the printer was on fire! The second thing is, there's a thing called solder, and that's usually what we do to firmware chips when we put them on the board. Anyway. Okay, Wi-Fi DOS at 30,000 feet. Okay, juice jacking was used to install mobile malware on cell phones that when they got on certain flights, it took the Wi-Fi out. Cyber or reality? Well, you can only pick one. I think I hear people saying both. That's not fair. You have to pick one, and you have to stick with it. Cyber or reality? Okay. That's reality, right? I mean, that's totally plausible. I could put devices, juice jack systems, I could put something on the phones that would send a denial of service attack to the Wi-Fi, disassociate people. I think that's plausible. So, hacking the grid and causing a large-scale power outage. Cyber or reality? Yeah, reality, right? I mean, the outage of 2003 is interesting. It wasn't necessarily a hack, but it was caused by a software bug. I think if that can occur, we certainly have seen other examples of it. Now, the thing that made for good television was it was a targeted power outage where they allowed them to break into a safe that had millions and millions of dollars of jewelry, but in the middle there was a laptop with a USB thumb drive that had the code to get to their Bitcoin account. And that's all they stole. You laughed. That was really what happened on the show. I'm not making that up. Okay, so hacking baby monitors. So does anyone know that the young gentleman here that's always dressed nicely? He's asking, how did Dave Kennedy win for best dressed hacker and not me? And then the girl here is saying, maybe because you have no idea how to hack. So, but yeah, someone is watching the baby monitors and then stealing children. Cyber, reality. Reality, yeah. We've all seen the news article, right? I mean, hack, again, probably weak or default username and password, but certainly that one is reality. Okay, so why are embedded systems so vulnerable? How did we get to this place where, is Mike Murray I think he said he had something else to do. Mike's not here. I stole this from Mike, who stole it from someone else. I give Mike credit for it, though. But I think it best describes why embedded devices are so vulnerable. Let's design something, okay? If we were to design something, let's say a hammer. There's two things we'd want to take into consideration when designing a hammer. Does it work for its intended use? Pounds nails in, removes nails. Does it work reliably? Right? The head doesn't fly off when I bring the hammer back. What are we not taking into consideration when we're designing our Source Conference Boston branded hammer? Well, we'll get there, but what are we not designing for? Misuse. What are some examples of misuse with a hammer?
Hitting you with the head.
Yes, hitting someone else on the head. We don't design our hammer to prevent you from hitting someone else over the head with it. It's the same thing when we design embedded systems. We design them to be able to control my sprinkler system from my phone, but we don't design them to prevent the third-party malicious actor from taking over my sprinkler system, which, I mean, the worst they could do is overwater my grass, I guess. So maybe that was a bad example. Anyway, but the point is that our hammers now are interconnected. They have things like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. We have to take into account the malicious third-party attacker. Now, there's a whole separate discussion on the economics of embedded systems that impact the security as well, but the hammer story is way more fun. So Okay, very quickly, I want to look at how some of these vulnerabilities exist in some of these systems. Okay, I'm going to tell a story that's called Inside Joel's Back Door. And why are you laughing? That's not supposed to be funny yet. It's called that for a perfectly good reason, okay? First, the person that found the vulnerability is one of my heroes, Craig Hefner, outstanding embedded device and firmware reverse engineer. Also, Zachary Cutlip, their colleagues at Tactical Network Solutions, very brilliant people doing research in the field. Craig wrote Binwalk. Anyone use Binwalk for reverse engineering firmware? Yeah, Craig's the author. So this story is going to exemplify some of the problems that we've seen in some of firmware. Now, we've already established, and I hope you're all on board with the fact that these problems exist in all kinds of embedded systems, right? Default passwords, web application vulnerabilities, buffer overflows, protocol weaknesses. So this story kind of exemplifies some of them. Now these vulnerabilities are old. They're not as old as my good friend Jack. I have to make fun of Jack at least once in every presentation. Check. Okay, October 2013, Craig Hefner releases details about a backdoor affecting D-Link DR100 routers revision A. That's important. The reason I spent time explaining all of that is because if you try to go buy a D-Link 100 revision A, you can't find it. You can only find the later revisions. It's extremely difficult to find that original router. So keep that in the back of your head. Reverse engineering the authentication, it turns out that when he looked at how it was being authenticated to the web server, he said, oh, it goes up in this branch and it checks this string, and if that string is in the user agent, then authentication is successful. He's like, wait a minute, all I have to do is set my user agent string to that really long gobbledygook string. Well, what is that gobbledygook string? Well, it turns out if you turn it around, it says edit by 0480 tool Joel backdoor. Hence, now you can laugh, hence the name of the story, Inside Joel's Backdoor. No password required. We never really found out who Joel was. I think he was a Taiwanese researcher working for Alpha Networks, and I'll explain a little about why that is. So why did Joel do this? Why did Joel have this need to be authenticated to the web server? Well, there are other processes on the router that need to access the configuration and change configuration of the router. The web server is the perfect mechanism to change configuration on the router. It's got all the necessary components. The problem is it needs a username and a password, which the user can change. So by introducing this nice, handy feature that I'm sure Joel called it, he was able to write programs to access and change the configuration of the router without knowing what the user set the username and password to. Bad idea, Joel. Bad Joel. But the story gets deeper. The Russians found it first. This particular firmware distribution was used on several different model routers, including ones used in Russia that were given out to ISPs. And the Russians, being Russian, had vodka and caviar and decided to reverse engineer firmware. And when they did that, that's a really bad stereotype. When they did that, they came across that string and tried to use it as the telnet password. After that, the forum stops. We don't know if they used it to go try and take over the world, or if they used it and then stopped talking about it. We don't know. But we do know the Russians found it first. We also know it's very easy to exploit, right? This wget command, set your user agent string, allows for essentially authentication bypass. But no one exposes their web management interface to the internet, right? Oh, but Shodan, you know what? I think Shodan can tell us that. And look, yes, I haven't checked very recently, but there are still instances of this firmware because the string is from Alpha Networks, is in the string. The THTTP Alpha Networks, which was a fork spin-off of D-Link, and that's what they use to build the firmware for. So there are buffer overflows in this firmware as well. Now inside of the buffer overflow, now Craig kind of like just put a link to pastebin and was like, oh yeah, I found this heinous vulnerability in the user agent, and by the way, there's a buffer overflow, here's the link to my pastebin. It was like one line in the bottom of the thing. So you limited to 200 bytes of shell code. Zachary Cutlip built some shell code that fits in 184 bytes. 200 minus 84, carry the 2. I think that fits. One of the T-Mobile routers had both private and public certificates in the firmware. If it's in the firmware, it's installed in every router, which means every router has the same key. Okay, that's bad. But these conditions, again, can't exist on all these other systems, but they do. Okay, so what do we do about it? I'll let that image sink in. Yeah, okay. That's not what we want to do about it, okay? No one wants to see that. So I came up with the 10 most wanted list this is really recommendations for us to hold our vendors to, and recommendations for vendors to hold their own software to, because really where the problem starts is when you get that firmware and you realize all these vulnerabilities. Well, the problem starts with the people who develop that firmware. So firmware should not contain backdoors, because that's a known password that everyone knows and it gets built into every instance of the embedded system. Like RuggedCom that built a backdoor into every system. So we're going to randomize it. It's going to be based on the MAC address of the system. And that's how we're going to derive the password. Okay, that's. Can I see the MAC address if I'm on the same network? Network 101? Yes. Okay, bad. Weak credentials and default credentials are two separate things, right? Weak credentials or backdoors are built in. Default credentials are user-facing, but the same on every system, right? Admin to log into any Linksys router earlier than a certain firmware version. That's bad. Insecure remote management protocols. A lot of devices today are being delivered with the management protocol being HTTP or Telnet, which is really bad. Usually people are laughing when it says on the slide. It must be really hard to read in the back. Yeah, it's really funny though. You should look at the slides online. It's kind of inappropriate too. Okay, next slide. So, open source drivers. A lot of embedded devices use the cheapest chips available to implement Wi-Fi, for example, and they will deliver you a binary blob, which is not the source code, but an actual binary. In order for you to move forward and upgrade the device, you have to bring that driver along with you. This is why when like Shell Shock came out, that you would say, well, some of these devices are going to be stuck on this version forever. That's one of the reasons why binary blobs, bad. Okay, I'm going to try and get to the demo really quick. Functions prone to overflow are really bad. These are some motivational posters for your developers. I respect myself. That's why I refuse to use sprintf. All my friends are using strcpy, but I'm not, because I understand how dangerous it is. You feel free to use those. Encryption, firmware encryption should be there. It should make it harder for people to reverse engineer. We should also sign firmware updates, right? This could potentially be prevented if you could update your treadmill in a nice, easy-to-use fashion. User-friendly firmware updates. Number 7, secure web frameworks. We'll look at some web vulnerabilities in a second. Maintain assert. When people find vulnerabilities in these systems, don't tell them to go away. And secure protocols. The Moonworm from Linksys took advantage of a weakness in HLNP, or the home protocol that allows you to share information. Really, really bad. HNLP, I think it is. So secure protocols. Okay, but this is the juicy part. I went fast over those. I demanded more. I had given that set of recommendations and things are still bad. So what I decided to do with Nick's help is create a new version of OpenWRT. This is the first time we've talked about this publicly. It's called Intentionally Vulnerable Wireless Router. I wanted to be very clear that this is not something you run in production. We've purposely removed the security controls from OpenWRT to create a vulnerable firmware which embodies all of those problems that I talked about before. I was the chief insecurity architect, and Nick was the chief insecurity engineer. So we had a lot of fun. As you know, OpenWRT has a code name for each release, in that it's a mixed cocktail. This is called Bloody Mary, because it's really vulnerable and has to do with IV. Yeah, get it? Okay. At the end, I'll give you my Bloody Mary recipe, which has never been released before either. So why did we do this, right? Raise awareness in the community. We've got all these other web applications intentionally vulnerable on purpose. We've got Metasploitable. We've got the Metasploit framework. We've got all these great tools to tell you about things that are vulnerable, but nothing that exists specifically for firmware. And it goes back to that problem where I can't find a D-Link Rev A. I can't create those vulnerabilities easily. I needed a platform to be able to do that, and that's what Nick created and what I helped design, is this platform where you can start building in your own vulnerabilities and using the ones that we've built in to learn, to show people, to demonstrate, and raise awareness in the community. I'm going to show you three. I'm going to try and show you three vulnerabilities. I just realized I don't have the command injection string handy because I don't have an internet connection, which is really going to put a damper on my demo. But I'm going to show you those in just a second. So authentication bypass, command injection, and cross-site request forgery. Now, tying them together is kind of interesting. We talked about how, well, my router port needs to be open to the world. If you have cross-site request forgery vulnerable on your router, and I know the static IP address of your router, I can open that for you. If I have cross-site request forgery, if I have authentication bypass, then I can own your router and put malware on it, because from there I can take advantage of command injection and malware. And this is just the first round of vulnerabilities we've built into this firmware. Okay, now I'll put that up after. That's my Bloody Mary recipe, which is really good. Now I really want one. Does anyone have tomato juice and Worcestershire pickle juice? No? Okay. Okay, so this is, we haven't even rebranded this part of it yet, but this is IVWRT. I'm logged in through the LAN port right now. Okay, so we have a virtual image that runs in QEMU. It actually gives you a WAN and a LAN port that's accessible inside of your VM. So I'm going to log in as admin. Oh, except I wanted to show you something there first. So a lot of routers, a lot of devices will have the username and the passwords like on the front page. And so we've replicated that. So whatever you change your root password to is on the front page without requiring authentication. You may think that's silly. I'll save you a Google search. There's been a string of devices that had this exact same vulnerability. Okay. So now that we've got that out of the way. I showed one vulnerability. Where we are with this project, I'm really proud of ourselves right now because we had one. That was awesome. Okay. Woo. Okay, so I'm going to log in as admin. And then I'm going to go to, so right now, this is the WAN interface. Okay, so this IP address represents the external WAN. Now you can see I can't get there, right? I can't get to the WAN interface. So we have an exploit that changes that. So if I go to this CSRF, now that I'm logged in, now I visited a page. Maybe it's a forum on people asking questions about this particular device, right? It's a FOSCAM camera, and I'm on their forum, and I come across this CSRF string, and when I click on it, it should add a firewall rule, save the page, and when I go back here, now I can access it from the WAN. Woohoo! Yay! Everyone clap, my demo work. Yay! Okay? The nice part is we control these exploits, so we can make sure that they work in certain scenarios, we can tweak them, we can extend them rather than being stuck on whatever vulnerabilities existed in some random firmware from some random provider. We can now control these to be able to do testing. Okay, I don't think I can do the authentication bypass because I forgot to bring the string, but there is authentication bypass on the diagnostics page, which also you can access without credentials. So we've kind of added that realm. The developers of this firmware had forgotten to put credentials around this particular page. So you can hit the diagnostics page without any passwords. Now, it's also just a diagnostics page, and they might do this on purpose, right? Why should I ask for username and password if I can access the diagnostics page? This right here is vulnerable to command injection, which I can't get to because I forgot the string. But anyway, it is vulnerable to command injection. And one of the commands we have, since it runs netcat, is a callback listener to a netcat show so you can get shell on it. So the important thing here is I wanted to show two different scenarios. Yeah, a lot of these vulnerabilities coming out, I can control the web interface and I can change things in the web interface. That doesn't let me put malware on it. When I want to put malware on it, I need some kind of command injection or file upload vulnerability to be able to go to the next level. I wanted to make sure both were in here so that we could show people the dangers of doing that. Okay, this all runs inside of QEMU virtually, so this whole OpenWrt distribution There's a shell script you get. It runs inside of virtualization, QEMU, and sets up the interfaces for you. There is the Python web server that we have to serve the exploits, and you just use a netcat listener to get that shell back. Eventually, I do want to implement protocols like HNLP, some of the other protocols. Today, those protocols don't exist on OpenWRT, so we're going to be looking for help from the community to help us do those kinds of things. I think that's it. We'll be releasing the full release of IVWRT with working exploits, full documentation, and as much support as we can have, hopefully at B-Sides Las Vegas if my talk gets approved, because I just submitted it the other day. So, with that, does anyone have any questions for me? So again, it's not publicly available yet. It'll be available this summer. Like a movie coming this summer. IVWRT. No questions? You agree with everything I said? I don't believe you. Okay. Challenge.
Just one thing.
Yes.
About 10 slides ago, you had mentioned something about automatic updates.
Yes.
And one of the problems with automatic updates, especially
is they break things.
And stuff, not only do they break things, but you can do a replay. You can see an automatic update go by on the network, rewrite it, and drop it back in, and make it replay.
Yeah, so the gentleman's question is, well, if we do automatic updates, anyone could be able to update my firmware if we're not doing signing of firmware updates, was your point. And I did kind of gloss over that. So there's two things with firmware. You have to sign the updates. Microsoft's been doing this for a really long time. Embedded devices typically don't do this, which means they accept any firmware that I give it. If your router is compatible with openware, conceivably, I could put my vulnerable on purpose distribution on your router. You would not want that. You'd be owned 6 ways to Sunday all day long. You want to have signed firmware updates so that it is checking that the firmware is valid before it installs it on the router. That's different from encrypting the firmware, where basically the firmware, before it's loaded up on the router, is encrypted so you can't reverse engineer it. Some people have tried encrypting the firmware, and it really comes down to XOR. Linksys has done a couple of different iterations where essentially it's XOR. You can do that twice. It works twice as good. Anyone else? Questions? That was a good question. I'm glad you said that. Okay. I hope when it becomes available, you check it out. Yes, Dan.
I just wanted to add another firmware encryption fail. There was a device that a good friend of mine audited that it checked using PPG, the latch, like verify or something like that, which actually has two different functions. One is just like, is this signed? Yes, no. Or if you like provide a file name as well, it checks to see that it's signed with a particular
yeah.
Key.
Yeah.
So like you can just provide something signed with anything.
As long as it was signed. Yeah, Dan's point was there was firmware that used GPG to do the checking, and GPG has two functions, like check to see if it's signed, and check to see if it's signed by a particular person's key, and they were just doing check to see if it's signed, which means anyone could sign it and it would pass validation. So yeah, they tend to do things like that. Any other questions? 1 minute left. Yes?
The Bloody Mary recipe.
Oh, yeah. Good point. I'll leave that up there while we're in transition. Very important Bloody Mary recipe in the last 30 seconds. Okay. You'll notice 4 ounces V8, 4 ounces vodka. Huh?
Good stuff.
2 horseradish, chipotle flavored hot sauce. That's one of the secrets. Tabasco sauce, celery bitters, Worcestershire sauce, pickle juice, very important. Forget lime juice, throw it out the window. Garnish with a lime, don't put lime in it. Use pickle juice, celery salt, regular salt. I like to mix, pour, back and forth. And then take a lime wedge and 2 green olives stuffed with cheese of your liking. Skewer, finish with a celery stalk. It'd be the best Bloody Mary ever. My mouth is watering like I really want one now.
Specify pickle juice. Dill, half sour.
I do the dill pickle juice, not sweet. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.